Hello, and welcome to Book Club Live. I'm Helen Bagnall. I'm the founder of Book Club Live and also of Also Festival and of Salon London, where I think we may have met. Thank you so much for being part of Book Club Live. It's something we've been doing for a couple of years now, where we have a book club with the author. We've been doing it in real life and it's been lovely, but when lockdown happened we thought, well, maybe we can do this digitally. So thank you so much for being part of Book Club Live tonight. And we have Robert Webb. It's very exciting. The book club works a little bit like this. I'm going to be in conversation with Robert, who I think is there, for about 30 minutes. And then we have a 10-minute break where you can get a cup of tea. Robert, you can order the book for a friend, send them the gift of come again, or you can have a peppermint tea if you haven't got any milk like Robert, or you can get yourself some crisps. We have a 10-minute break and then we come back and we put our questions to Robert about his book. I had some questions already coming in. I have to mention Dickon has built a chat function which you can see, so you can type in your questions if you want to do it that way, or those of you who have the Book Club Live mobile number can text them to me. It's all absolutely fine. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce Robert Webb. I'm sure you know who Robert is. He's a well-known comedian and much-loved peep show actor. He is the best-selling, Sunday Times best-selling author for How Not to Be a Boy. And if you haven't read that, it really is a superb book, as well as Come Again. And in Come Again, he has definitely combined the sort of 90s student experience with time travelling and a spy thriller romper caper. So, you know, what is not to love with that? And I know that many of you have already read the book because you've been texting me saying how much you've loved it, what good fun it is, how bonkers it is, how much you enjoyed it, how it's the perfect book to disappear into. So thank you so much for letting us know how much you've enjoyed it. If you haven't, don't worry, I'll keep the questions on the side of it. Doesn't matter whether you've read it or not, so we can all just really, really enjoy this book club live together. So, Robert, did you set out to write a time-travelling, many-world exploring meditation on grief?
No, hello, Helen, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. No, not really. I mean, the kernel of the idea was, yes, that daydream about going back in time and fixing things or changing things, I think is not unusual. I think it'd be odd if you didn't have that daydream from time to time about, you know, the various times in your life in the past. But the idea sort of came to me ages ago, actually, and it was the nut of the idea. Widow goes back in time, meets dead husband when he's an annoying teenager, and so, you know, she knows why he died, and she thinks she's there to save him, so she's going to try and do everything exactly the same, and that hence comedy, because that struck me as an immediately funny situation, even though it's, you know, it comes from this dark place of not only her grief, but a grief that she's not she's finding impossible to deal with. She's in despair. And that's where we meet her at the very beginning. But the stuff about the sort of broader elements, that where the book slightly goes off the rails, some would say,
In a beautiful way.
Where it broadens out in the third part, and the stuff that I seed in the first part about her job, working for this guy who's got himself in over his head with Russian gangsters and all of that slightly broader stuff, which, you know, this is a thoughtful little book about love and grief and memory, but which also contains a punch up and a car chase. But the punch up and the car chase, no, I didn't know I was going to do that. And I thought, well, if I'm surprising myself, then I'm certainly surprising the reader. I defy anybody to say that they saw that coming.
I did cross my mind when I was reading. It's like, did your editor, when they got the manuscript, say, "Oh, Robert, you've written a cross-genre book"? I see.
No, they were very good about it, actually. I mean, like, you know, I mean, the story opens with a dream, and I think I was vaguely aware as I was doing it that it's a shocking and outrageous cliche that you start a story with a dream. You're really not meant to do that. And crossing genre, I was aware that you're really not meant to do that either. But it was like the conversation happening in my head, the sort of left brain, right brain critic versus artist thing going on. The critic was constantly going, "You're not supposed to do that," and the artist was going, "Get stuffed. I know what I'm doing." I didn't really know what I'm doing, but that, you know, the noise in my head was, "Get lost, leave me to do this. You've got, what do you know with your tutu in English? I've got a BAFTA, shut up." So it was a bit like that. But that was my 2018.
That is really interesting you say that, because again crossed my mind again today, was that idea. But you know, as you say, the artist in you does know what it's doing, and it does know how to turn experience into art.
It sort of does. I mean, it sort of does. You certainly have to, when you're writing the first draft, which I did find quite difficult. I mean, this is my first novel, not my first book,
No.
but it was a completely different experience to writing How Not to Be a Boy, and I found it quite hard. And yes, during that first draft, you do have to tell the critic to be quiet, because otherwise you just won't. Otherwise, the alternative is paralysis. So I kind of have to trust myself a bit, and then the rest of it is, once you've got that, the rest of it is craft, is, you know, is the enjoyable part of, you know, getting what you've got, and, you know, making sure that it's one good bit followed by another good bit. There's a lovely bit in Stephen King's book about writing called On Writing, where he talks about the editing process, and he says, you know, you present this to your editor, and your editor says, "We need to lose this," and you feel like saying, "But that's a really good bit," and he says, "Of course, they should all be good bits. That's why you're being paid." So it's just a question of getting all the good bits to line up with each other, you know, in a way that is satisfying. I mean, I have to pay more attention to structure and to plot and to balance and to suspense and all the things I didn't really have to worry about in How Not to Be a Boy, because no one really expects a memoir to have a proper structure. I imposed a structure on it. I turned it into sort of part one, part two, boy, man. But really, you know, your life doesn't follow a sort of 5-act plot, and no one really expects that. With this, I thought you know, there was more of a technical challenge.
Yeah. But I think, you know, if your, you know, confidence can be so fleeting and your inner critic can be so strong, having a BAFTA to hit it with, you know, is you've earned that, and it helps. You know, you can really, it is cross genre, and it's fabulous. It's fabulous for being cross genre. So, you know.
Well, I was hoping. I mean, you know, it was clear to me that it was, by the time I got to the end, it was trying to do several different things, and I wasn't sure if I'd succeeded in getting all of that to cohere. But I was sure that the reader was going to have a fucking good time watching me try, and so that was my thinking. And also, you know, hopefully my voice, stroke Kate's voice, the voice of our protagonist, is sufficiently strong to get it all to mesh together, because I trusted in my own sort of comic voice, really, to get from one end of a sentence to another in a way that readers will stick with me.
Yeah, perfect. Can you tell us a bit about the book? You know, you are the author. It's a book club. You know, give us an outline of Come Again.
So it's about Kate, our heroine, who's about 45 years old, about my age, but younger, and she is a widow. And she lost her husband, Luke, about 9 months ago. They met when they were kids. They met 28 years ago in 1992 at the University of York when they were freshers. They met in Freshers Week. But Kate isn't getting better. In fact, she's in trouble. One day, she wakes up. She's 18 years old. It's 1992. She's in her college room. It's Freshers Week. This was the week. In fact, tonight was the night that she met Luke for the first time. What do you do? So that was the idea for the beginning of the story, and then it was just a question of coming up with a satisfying ending and perhaps something interesting to happen in the middle. But she, as I've already said, that she knows how he died. He has a slow-growing meningioma, a brain tumor in his head. He's had that since before they met, and so she thinks she's there to warn him. So she's going to try and win his trust. She's going to try and go out with him. But of course, he's not the middle-aged man that she lost. He's the annoying 19-year-old English student that she first met. He was one of those guys that you almost go out with despite their personality. He's really, I've made him very, very good looking.
Well,
I've made him as good looking as I dare. And that was part of the thing the first time round, but of course, you know, then they fell in love, and then they got married, and then they were together forever. But at the time of Freshers Week, he's still doing all those ridiculous affectations that some of us, some male English students, let's say, were vulnerable to. I mean, I was never quite that bad. I never pretended to be French, but I certainly. But of course, he's pretending to have read lots of books that Kate knows perfectly well he hasn't read. She has full knowledge of not only his future, but a wife's knowledge of his boyhood, of his childhood, and his past as well. So it's actually quite a lonely experience for Kate, because not only is Luke there and he doesn't know who she is, but all of her, you know, 3 of her lifelong friends are also there. They don't know who she is either. She's making friends with them for the first time as well. But in her head, she's much, much older. She's surrounded by children. And so it's partly, there's some interesting games to play about not just her foreknowledge, but identity and the way we change as we get older.
Yeah, and I want to talk, I want to kind of Melvin Bragg style unpack some of that as we kind of go through.
Melvin, brag me.
We're going to try. We're going to go full Melvin Bragg on some of the areas you just spoken about. But one of the things I've had a really lovely week. I've kind of had a Robert Webb week. I reread How Not to Be a Boy. I reread Come Again. I watched Flashdance. I've watched series 1 of Peep Show. All terrific, all amazing.
You must be sick of the sound of my voice and the sight of my face.
Well, no, not at all. I love it. I want more, much more. But what I realised is that there's a lot of you in Come Again. When you have a Robert Webb week like I have, you can kind of see how much of you is in it. And yet what is really weird, what is really spooky, is there's even more of you in it than even you knew when you were writing it. And the main character, Luke, he has, as you explained, a tumour that goes untreated that he doesn't know he's got. And as you were writing this, you were facing something similar yourself and unknown to you. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I just finished the book. In fact, I finished the copy edit when I went for a cast medical for Back, second series of Back, the Channel 4 series I make with David Mitchell. And normally that's a very perfunctory affair. The doctor tells you to cough and then you go away. It's in a nice office in Harley Street with very deep carpets, and the production company pays, and it's all very jolly. Anyway, he put a stethoscope on my heart and pulled a face and said, so what have you been doing about the heart murmur? And I said, what heart murmur? And then he sent me to a cardiologist who, after a few more tests, echocardiogram and a CT scan, the cardiologist said, you're not going to have a heart attack in the next fortnight, but if you don't get this fixed in the next 2 or 4 or 6 months, this heart will fail. So that got my attention. So what I had was a prolapsed mitral valve, one of the valves in my heart, which is supposed to be opening and closing like this, had just sort of withered, like prolapsed basically. So the valve was doing this, and all the blood that was supposed to go into one chamber and be pushed around my body was flowing backwards. And so the heart was having to had grown and remodeled and done all kinds of crazy things to keep the show on the road, and was about to pack up. And I'd experienced this as feeling a bit tired. And that was it, really. I just put that down to being 47 and not taking care of myself very well. So it was extraordinary, because it turns out, yes, over those last 2 years, I've been writing a story about a 47-year-old male who drops dead while emptying the dishwasher because he's got something wrong with him that he had no idea about. So I'm very open to the idea that was my imagination trying to tell me something.
You really think so?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wish it had been less subtle. But yeah. No, I think, these ideas come from, your subconscious is aware of all kinds of things that you don't know about. And it will have been aware that my heart was in trouble.
Yeah, and I wonder, I think that's a bit my tongue-in-cheek question earlier about the artist in you. Was that kind of I can see why that, your subconscious was working with what it could do to get. I can see, how that can be true. It's such an interesting idea. I wondered though, did that experience change the way you felt about the book? And you said you had finished writing it, but you then had this incredible surgery, this really invasive surgery.
Yeah, it doesn't change my relationship to it now. I would imagine that if I go on, as I hope and plan to write more books, that by the time I'm on book 6, I will look back on Come Again with particular fondness, not just because it's the first one, but because that was the watershed that, you know, where I stopped drinking and smoking and I started exercising every day and I eat properly. And, you know, that was the brush with something very nasty that has almost certainly, assuming I'm spared by the fucking virus outside the front door, has almost certainly extended my life. I'm going to feel pretty affectionate towards it.
Yeah, no, I can see that. You know, and I mentioned this to you earlier when we spoke, but, you know, I noticed in the acknowledgements to How Not to Be a Boy that you call your wife the woman from the future. In your memoir, you call your wife the woman from the future, and this book is essentially about a woman from the future, and it's a central part of Come Again. And it just made me think, it's, you know, a bit of a strange question, but I wondered, you know, is Come Again really about how love saves us one way or another in the end?
I think if you had to put it down to a sort of moral log line, it's we save each other. Yeah, that's what it's about. I mean, it's about I mean, don't tell anyone, it might put them off, but partly it's about grief. In fact, the whole book's about grief. But you know, there are ways of approaching these things. And I've always thought that you can talk about dark subjects in a humorous way, that if it's a fit subject for drama, it's a fit subject for comedy. It's just a question of tone and making sure that, you know, intellectually you can defend the joke and you know what the joke's doing and whose side the joke is on. And also, and just, yeah, technically, having an understanding of what the joke is doing, because it's an emotional thing. You make, the verb is make, you make someone laugh, and so you feel a responsibility, almost sort of duty of care. Sorry, I've sidetracked myself, but it's about grief, but it's a funny book, and it charts that arc that Kate is in, where when you lose someone, particularly someone you live with, everywhere you turn, their absence is almost a presence, that, you know, the hum of the fridge and the squeak of the sofa, and, you know, they're just there, and you are stuck in the past. And that's what Kate is when we find her. And in the story, she has to literally go and live in the past in order to rediscover the present and to re-engage with the present, a new life, and in fact, new love, as the people who've read the book will know, and which I don't want to go on about for the two people who haven't read the book. But it's a sort of classic rom-com in some ways, because, you know, there's the inappropriate other partner that you don't want our heroine to get together with. It's just in this case, that's the husband. So there are two love stories essentially happening in two different times. So yeah, it's about her learning to reintegrate the lost past with the new present, a process that we call mourning, the bit that comes after grief, the bit that's good for us, the bit that has value and that helps. That's where we get better. So it's about that movement from grief to mourning, and from Kate being stuck in the past to re-engaging with the present and finding that the present has lots to say for itself.
Did you grief is a theme in How Not to Be a Boy as well, and, you know, I wondered if you were drawing on your own experience with Kate's loss.
Yes, certainly. When I was talking about, you know, when you lose someone you live with, I'm talking about my mother died when I was 17. So you know, I have first-hand experience of that, and grief might turn out to be my sort of my subject. I wish there was something a bit more cheerful, but maybe, you know, when I write the next book, it won't be quite so griefy. But clearly, I still had some stuff to work through in this book, and there was, with the memoir, there was a satisfaction, if that's not too strong a word, of framing that story in my own words, of describing what that was like. I found that. I mean, I didn't do it necessarily for me. It was a kind of collateral benefit, but I think there was a catharsis there for me. But lots of people have been kind enough to say that central chapter, the middle of the book, dealing with that part of my life, that they've found it helpful. And I hope in the same way Come Again reaches out to people who've lost people, which is pretty much all of us, isn't it? And you know, I think it's the ambition of all comedians to make themselves useful. We don't talk about it, but that's kind of what we kind of want to do, sort of casually by accident.
That's really interesting. The ambition of all comedians to make themselves useful. You know, I think you covered it and then you sort of rushed over it really quickly, but I think it's absolutely fascinating, this idea that, you know, I think with your experience in your art and your you know, TV and your writing, you know how to be funny. and you understand loss. And putting those two things together in a novel is quite an unusual thing to do well. And having the confidence to do it is quite extraordinary.
Well, I think the experience of writing the memoir and also its success, basically the reaction that it got, which was so positive in every imaginable way, it does great things for your confidence. And I'm so glad that I did that before trying to write my first novel. I want to, just to repeat, I want to write lots of novels, but I'm glad that I started with a memoir, and it gave me, yeah, I got the runaway idea that I sort of knew what I was doing, even though to say again, the stuff about making up a story from scratch is a whole different thing. But I mean, that's the sort of macro thing, working out the story and the plot. Down at the nitty gritty of sentences, it's exactly the same job, because whether you're describing something that's in your memory or something that you've just made up, both things live in your imagination, and memories live in your imagination. Where else are they going to live? And it's a question of getting what's in your head, in a version of that, into the reader's head via the enigma machine of the English language. That's exactly the same job. So it wasn't in some ways it wasn't so different.
Yeah, I understand. So the middle section of the book is, goes back to the 90s, and that's been, it's been such a hit. It's been such a hit everywhere. The reviewers love it. Readers absolutely love it, and it is brilliantly nostalgic, and really, really fun. But of course, when you wrote this, it was during Brexit. Remember Brexit, everyone? And and I get the sense that you wanted to indulge nostalgia, but whilst also sort of warning against it. Is that right?
Yeah, the book definitely has a complicated relationship with nostalgia, in that we're having our cake, definitely. That there's all the fun of going back to 1992, and for people roughly my age, and even not, there's the fun of remembering certain things, and you remember where you were when boys were going around with Ned's Atomic Dustbin t-shirts on with long sleeve tops underneath, and the hair and clothes and the music and stuff like that. I mean, we think of the 90s, quite often the first thing people say is Britpop or Blair, but obviously that was 97, that was much later. 92, you've had 2 years of John Major, another 5 to go. I mean, it was yet another conservative decade, really. And what I'm suspicious of is my own nostalgia for it being gloriously boring. That there wasn't, there wasn't much progress, but there were no terrible regressions either. There was no Brexit, there was no Trump, there was certainly no horrifying pandemic. And so, obviously one can get nostalgic about that, but there again, is that just my own rose-tintedness? I mean, there was a horrible recession in 92 as well, around that time. And a lot of people lost their jobs, and it was, it really depends who you are and what you were doing. For me, obviously, it was my first time at university. It's never going to be. It was so exciting. It was a good time. But when you're that age, whether you go to university or not, that age, the great privilege of youth is that you have absolutely no sense of perspective. And so if something goes wrong, it's the worst thing that's ever happened. If you get your heart broken when you're 20, it's never been so terrible. And will never be so terrible again. It feels like, of course it will. Of course, things will be much more terrible. But I wouldn't want to tell a 20-year-old that. So yeah, no, I definitely have mixed feelings about nostalgia, and something that comes through in the book. It was strange writing it in 2018, 2019, where Brexit. There was nothing but Brexit on the news, and I thought I was patting myself on the back that the first and the third part of the book is set in the present day, and I refer to Brexit. I mean, that word crops up literally once in 84,000 words, although the book really is riddled with Brexit anxiety. There's lots of stuff about Britain, lots of stuff about politics. Well, I say lots of stuff. It's not a political novel particularly, but there's all of that sort of anxiety about identity and nostalgia is lurking in the background.
Yeah, we've done a lot. We've done a lot of salons on memory and actually nostalgia, and I think we've got a neuroscientist in memory watching. Hello, Catherine. Hello, Catherine. Lovely.
Oh my goodness.
And I think one of the things we've really got to understand about memory is how much they shift, and we tend to think about them as fixed, but they're not. They're really fictionalized, and every time we access a memory, we're changing it to fit what we want to do. And sort of
Yeah.
like I think did you want to really explore this idea with like our most precious memories, the meeting of Luke and Kate, and really.
Yes, I mean, I do glancingly, in that we start with Kate's dream of the first conversation she had with Luke, and later when she's back in '92, we have the real thing. Except it's not the real thing. It's her meeting him for the second time, Luke meeting her for the first time. But of course, she is a different person. Not only is she 28 years older in her mind, but he's different too, because she's behaving differently. So the way, it's not just a time travel thing, it's also a memory thing.
Yeah, I know. I don't think that my husband actually remembers meeting me. I think we both. I think
Well,
we we
these
both.
things are overrated. Maybe that meeting you wasn't the important thing.
It's just like we've agreed a fiction that's sort of probably about then. That'll do. And I think there is that sense of you can just get so romanticized about your memories. But the time in the '90s, the college friends are so superb. They're really fun. The dialogue is excellent. And I wanted to ask you if being an actor really helped with being a novelist in terms of being able to get into the characters in a way that most novelists can't do.
It's not so much, thank you. It's not so much being an actor as being a script writer. I
Yeah.
think that if anything, I'm very aware that dialogue is my comfort zone. I'm never happier than when I get characters talking to each other. Um, uh, but it kind of appeals to the megalomaniac in me, because if you were writing a script, then half of this book would be stage directions that I know full well the actors and probably the director will never read. So it's like writing a script where everyone's got to read the stage directions, and you become the director, and you're the costume designer, and you're in charge of this, where the camera is, how close we are, how far away we are, and you're also the narrator. You're writing all the dialogue, but you're also telling the readers how the lines are spoken, really, because I've told you, I've done the casting, I've told you how these characters talk. So I love all that, being completely fully in charge of that experience. Of course, I'm not in charge at all, because once I've written it, how all of this is interpreted by the reader is totally beyond my control. But that's all right. That's part of the deal. But I love all of the responsibility. Obviously, the flip side of that is, if it doesn't work, it's all my fault, and I can't blame any of the talented people that I would normally be working with if this were something for the screen.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's not collaborative. But then on the other hand, like you say, you get to be almost like a film director. It's just like you want a car chase, you want you can go anywhere.
I don't have to worry about the budget. It's very much not my problem.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes across as the glee with, and I don't want to spoil the ending, but, no one will guess the ending either. But, the glee with which you can, switch between these kind of like various exciting, almost like movie, filmic, conventions in a book is just superb. So there is talking about the language and the characters back in the '90s segment. Did you, obviously there's absolutely brilliant moments when Kate tries to talk to Luke about being from the future and what he needs to know. Did you think a lot about whether it would have been useful for you to be visited by someone in the future? Was it something that that it such an interesting conceit, and I just wondered if that was something that it hadn't struck me till I read your book, Robert. Actually, when we were younger, loads of options were open to us that aren't now.
Yeah.
You sort of ruined my sort of my view of the future.
It's tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really sucks. No, you have loads of options, and you go down a certain path, and the further down that road you get, the fewer other little pathways leading off. It does all close down a little bit. I mean, there are people who would say, stuff and nonsense. Tomorrow I'm leaving my partner and I'm starting a jet ski business in Bahrain. Even though Bahrain's probably landlocked, I don't know. Anyway, yes, no, it doesn't depress. I think the fun of it partly is that all of the teenagers, and really it's just my memory of I don't know any teenagers, but my daughters are 8 and 10. I'm sure teenagers will be a big part of my life in the future, not too distant future. But this is all going from memory and just the kind of conversations I remember having as a student, the kind of nonsense we talked, but how much fun it was. Um, so there's all that lightness and the frivolousness and just the ability to waste time without worrying about it because you're going to live forever. I mean, you tell a 20-year-old you're going to die and you go, yes, of course I know that. They don't really know it. I don't think I knew that when I was 40, never mind 20. So so there's that, but also the fact that Kate knows so much more. I know that I'm much more comfortable at this age than I was when I was young, that I'm happier now than I was when I was young. I'm less hungry and I'm less anxious and I'm less panicky about I've got nothing to worry about. I mean, this is very, very smug. Don't hate me, but I've achieved certain things in my career. I don't have to worry that they'll never know. They'll never know that I can jump up and down in a leotard and a big curly wig. They'll never. Now I've shown them. I've given them what they didn't know they wanted, and that's done now. So I mean, there are various things that I can kind of relax about. So I like being middle-aged. I'm very happy with it. So it's so there's that, and I think that I hope that sense comes across. This is not a book about regretting not being young anymore. Quite the reverse.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. We have to go for a break now. It's gone so quickly. Thank you, Robert. We're going to take a 10-minute break now. So it's a great opportunity to get yourself a cup of tea or something to eat or whatever you like. And we'll be coming back in 10 minutes. Please do. I see we've got some questions coming up already, but please text me if you've got a number. And we'll be back with Robert in 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
And welcome back to Book Club Live with Robert Webb. I hope you enjoyed the first half we did. I hope you're ready for the second half, which is the interactive part when we can all get to put our questions to Robert. I'm going to start with a question from Jenny and Marion. Thanks, Jenny and Marion. And they wanted you to know, Robert, that they think your dressing gown is very nice and very colourful.
It is colourful. Yeah, you must be wondering what the hell this room is. It's actually the room I laughingly call my study, but the dressing gown is a giveaway. That's the laughingness. I quite like the way the vertical stripes are complementing the horizontal stripes of the picture behind me. It's all for you.
Oh, this is where the magic happens. But that wasn't their question. Their question is, how long did it take you to write the book, and how much did the final version vary from the first draft?
On and off, with a lot more off than on, 2 years. So I started basically January, February, March 2018. I spent standing in the garden worrying about what might happen in this book, and then I started slowly to write it. At one point, about halfway through, I sent the first half of the first draft to my editor. I think that was a bad move, and he sent back notes, which was an even worse move. I'm blaming him. I think you're supposed to sort of keep going at that point, but I went back because I was so worried that I got the foundations of the story wrong. So that was quite a slow and painful process. But how much does the last draft differ from the? It's really a question of same with the memoir. Actually, I just wrote long, and it was a question of cutting thousands and thousands of words. Francis Bickmore, my editor, politely pointed out that the story started about 4 times over. There were like the first 4, any one of the first 4 chapters could have been chapter 1. So I got rid of a couple of those and reordered it in a way that felt very brave. And it used to start in a completely different way. So quite dramatic changes, but all hopefully for the better. Again, it's the thing of getting from one good bit to the next good bit. And sometimes when you find yourself blocked or stuck or just unable to do much, it's usually, in my case, I'm finding in my vast experience of having written 2 books, it's usually that you're just not enjoying where you are at the moment, that you've taken a wrong turn, and that you're writing something out of duty, or because you think this needs to be filled in, or because you think the reader needs this information. You're not enjoying it. And so usually the cure to any kind of block is to just go back and cut them, delete the last 600 words, or at least just go back to the last time you were having a good time and take it from there, really.
Thank you. I think it's really useful to have the sort of technical side of writing a book explained, Robert, because I think, there is so much about that makes book writing look so easy, and it isn't. It's so incredibly hard, and I think it really puts people off when they're thinking perhaps about writing. And I remember we have a lot of writers that listen, and I really like stories that just show the work and the craft that goes into it, because it is doable, it is attainable, but it's a huge amount of work. No different.
It is. You should expect it to be like like any job, that it can be very frustrating, and you feel like you're wading through treacle some of the time. And with me, I know different. Every writer is different. But with me, again, it's the mapping out the story, which I didn't, by the way. I think I will do next time. I don't think if I planned the whole thing, it would be. I gave myself credit. It's quite sorry. Something went wrong and completely.
It's okay.
Something weird happened there, and it completely addled my already.
No, it was all fine. It was all fine.
What on earth was I saying?
We were answering.
Planning, yeah. But then obviously when it gets down to putting one sentence in front of another, that's the joy of it, and that's the bit that I really like. And for me, this is just another way to entertain people. I'm quite happy with to think of myself as an entertainer as much as an artist. In fact, I'm slightly shy of the word artist, even though what I'm doing is that. But in terms of making them laugh and touching them, reaching out with the stuff that's sad, but doing things that are exciting, making sure those pages are turning, just putting on a show, really. That's the way I think of it, I think of the drafts as rehearsal, and my editor as the director, although I don't have to see as much of him as I have to see of a director, and the contact is much more meaningful and more effective for that. But then the book coming out and the first readers reading it is the performance, and my general attitude is an ambitious one about, I want to sit down and take careful aim and then blow their heads off. I mean, I want to give them something that they didn't know they really, really wanted. And that's, so it's exactly the same attitude as when I'm acting or whatever I'm doing.
Got it. That is really interesting. Thank you. Right, question from Gina Rippon. Hello, Gina. How are you doing? Nice to hear from you. Robert, how much of the time travel theme relates to a wish to rewrite your own life?
Not much, thank you. Not much, very seriously. I mean, the problem with the daydreaming about going back and rewriting your life game is that as soon as you have children, you've ruined it, because you go back and start mucking about, then you don't meet your partner at the time that you met them. You don't conceive the children when you conceive. Before you know it, you've bumped off your own kids. So, but I mean, even putting that to one side, I mean, it's that there's a beautiful line in which I'm going to mangle in a song by Elbow, and now I know what these feet are for. Every step takes me closer to your door, or something like that. I've completely destroyed it. But if you're happy with someone and especially if you've got children, then you don't want to muck around too much. But if you gave yourself a holiday from that and just didn't think about that, then I suppose there are things I would do differently. I'd be kinder. I think I'd be less. I mean, I slightly talked about this in How Not to Be a Boy, that when I turned up at university, I thought I was in a big hurry to seem ambiguous and sexy and witty and all of this stuff. Kindness didn't really wasn't really in the top 10 things that I wanted people to think. Honesty, bravery, the really good stuff. I sort of wasn't interested in. So I'd like to go back and be less of a dick, but we all would.
But if someone came back and said, if someone came back to you from the future and said, you need to be less of a dick, which is your words, not mine,
Yeah.
would we take any notice of anyone?
I would deeply resent that. And I'd say, what do you know about it, Baldy? Get lost.
Exactly. That's the joy of it, I suppose. I've got a question from okay. Just going to take a minute or two to get back. Dickon, my lovely producer, am I still on the camera here?
Yes.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much for your questions. I've had a question from Fiona, who wants to know what colour is the wall behind Robert. An interesting question for Book Club Live, and I understand in the break he did go and try and find out for you what your question is. Rachel, Neville, got a question from you. If you got to travel back to the first day of Freshers Week, what would you want to put right and why? I hope you think Robert has answered that question in the question that he's had from Gina. I hope so. Anyway, let me know if there's another amendments that you'd like me to put to him, or if you want to ask again. And Catherine Loveday as well. Catherine is actually the neuroscientist I was talking about, the professor of neuroscience, particularly an expert in memory. And her question is, has writing the book made you consider what advice a 70-year-old Robert Webb would give you now? And again, Catherine, I hope that Robert has answered that in his answer to the last question. I do know that he does really think that that his message to himself would be, practice kindness, be kind to the people around you, be kinder. But it's sort of really difficult when you're 20. Okay, we are now going to take a very quick 2-minute break. I'm just going to get Robert back onto the screens, and then we will be back with you. So see you in 2 minutes. Hey, and welcome back. Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hello,
Oh,
here's Robert. Welcome back,
oh,
Robert.
thank God.
Um,
Oh, that was very disappointing.
Robert, I know that you've used the time usefully to find out for us what is the colour of blue on the wall behind you.
It's Farrow and Ball's Stiff Key Blue, but I believe it's pronounced Dookie Blue.
Okay, well, I hope that's an answer to your question there, Fiona. Again, it wasn't her only question. She wanted to ask you about your decision to write, to have the main character in your first novel as a woman, and wanted to ask you what made you make that decision.
That's how it. Thank you. That's how it sort of came to me. Really, Kate sort of appeared. This was in 2012, by the way. I was sitting in Jeremy's car filming a scene of Peep Show, and I was they were re-rigging the lights, and I was just on social media, and a lovely man, Nigel Cole, who just directed me in a film called The Wedding Video, said, "Has anyone got any ideas for my next film?" And I just remember unfocusing my eyes, and Kate kind of came to me. Really, it was widow goes back in time, meets future dead husband, and I thought about the challenge of writing a female protagonist, and I thought about doing myself a favor and changing the sex of the main character to a man, and it just didn't work so well. I didn't like it, and quite apart from anything else, you go back, and she wants to get to know Luke again, and she's coming on to Luke, and she's flirting with Luke. Now that's okay when you got a 45-year-old woman in her head trying to get off with a 19-year-old boy. Change the sexes of these characters, and that suddenly starts to taste a bit so I didn't really. I mean, it's not illegal. There's nothing wrong exactly, but it's just a bit. So I didn't really want to do it like that. It all seemed to work the right way around. In terms of how I approached it, I did so warily and with enormous respect. It wasn't like I was constantly asking Abby, how does a woman open a cupboard door? What do women think? Because I'd like to think that I've got female friends, and Abby, I was raised by women. I read women. I have the superpower of listening to women, and so there's all that. But I mean, at the same time, I absolutely didn't want to fall into all of those cliched male author writes a woman traps of, no, Kate is not going to inspect herself naked in the mirror in a whimsically critical manner, and she's not interested in her she's no more interested in her boobs than she is in any other part of her anatomy. No, she doesn't do press-ups in the nude. No, that stuff I managed to avoid eventually. I managed to just about avoid. And I wanted to make her, she is a flawed human being. She's really bad-tempered. She can be very unreasonable. She's quite aggressive, but she has this, this laid-back wit. And I wanted to make her a fully rounded person. So that's what I tried to do. And then I didn't really think about her sex that often. Sometimes it really is important, her relations with men, obviously, her relationship with her physicality, with violence, with sexuality. I mean, there are certain areas where, of course, it's different, and so you tread imaginatively. I mean, you put yourself in their position. It goes back to the question we had about acting. Does being an actor give you any advantage here? I mean, I certainly approach it in the same way. It's not how would this character say this line? It's how would I say this line if I were this character? And that might seem like a nice distinction, but it makes all the difference. And in the same way, what would Kate do in this situation? I don't know. There is no Kate. What would I do in this situation if I'd had Kate's life experience? Is a much more helpful way of going about it for me. So that's all my thoughts on that.
Oh, amazing thoughts on that. And you've created a fully fledged human in Kate. And that's unusual in women, in characters. Unusual in any character in a book. And I loved it when she picked up her husband's "This is what a feminist looks like" t-shirt.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we've got a question from Duncan Middleton, and he says, "Hello, Duncan. How are you?" He says, you say how grief is your thing and the importance about talking about it. With that in mind, I'm just wondering what you think of the romanticisation of Britain's stiff upper lip, especially this VE weekend. Thanks, Duncan.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of, yes, there's a lot of nonsense going around particularly from the government. It feels like, and everyone's doing their best, and we're all a bit strung out and knackered, and we should all give ourselves a break. But there are aspects of the way the government has dealt with this that are, there are going to be questions to be asked about it in terms of the language of, certainly the language of battle. When you get, when Johnson got it, and there was all that talk about he's battling the disease, and and it's all of this martial language is peculiar. And haven't we learned by now? I mean, there are so many people who survive cancer, and indeed people who don't survive cancer, and you hear what they say before they don't survive it, about that this language just isn't helpful, because if you're battling cancer, what, you lose the battle because you weren't sufficiently brave, or it's all bollocks. So I think all of that stuff about war is potentially just deeply unhelpful. So yeah, those are mine.
Thank you, Duncan. Got a question from Judes, and she says, "Thank you for a wonderful lockdown escape." In words, loved the whole book. So she says, "We will have all formed our personal perspective, but from you as the author, moving between the beautiful and sensitively observed actual and raw grief of Kate for the loss of Luke, to the exquisite happiness she finds with Toby. Which of these two narratives of love do you ultimately find the most powerful?"
Oh, it's the second story. It's Toby. I'm in love with Toby. And I really, Toby really grew on me I had the idea that there has to be someone else, someone she overlooked first time round. But I didn't know who that was and how that was going to turn out. And I was really pleased with how that came together. It was a really exciting, I found that a really exciting bit and joyful things to write. I love that. That's my favorite thing about the book is her and Toby.
Oh, yeah, I know. I can really see that, and I'm really glad to hear that. It shouldn't make a difference, but it really makes a difference. I'm really glad to hear that.
Good.
Yeah, I've got a question from B, and she's mentioning your heart surgery, and she said she was surprised at how little is written about it from a personal perspective. But I mean, I guess it's timing. But she's saying now you're on the other side. Will you be writing more about what happened to you?
I did write a sort of what was it, about a 1,500 word piece in the Observer magazine, actually, in not the magazine, the New Review. I think it came out about three weeks ago, subtly timed to come out in publication week. I was thinking at the time, I am so going to milk this when the book comes out, quite rightly, in my opinion. So it's there. If you look it up in the Observer. I doubt, having done that, and I wrote that as carefully as I could, and I thought that was a fairly good piece. I don't plan to write about it again. I think you can bore people. You go, yeah, Rob, yeah, you nearly died, yeah, whatever. Because you say it once, and people are like, oh my god, but then you say it twice, it's kind of, yeah.
Heard that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know how that ends anyway. Yeah, I know. Well, we like the new. We're awful humans. We've got a question from Alexandra Henry, and she said, Robert, she thought the theme of a woman reflecting on how much she supported and guided a boy to become a good man was really, really interesting, and something that women often discuss. So her question is, do you think it would have worked in reverse? Yeah.
No, again, it's that was one of the things that I thought about, changing. Before I did it, I thought I was asking a great deal of myself for the first novel to have a heroine, and as soon as I started, actually, I thought this isn't going to be too bad, because I wrote a whole book claiming that the differences between men and women were exaggerated, and this was kind of me putting my something where my mouth had been. So if that doesn't sound repulsive,
we know.
But what I mean.
Yeah, we know.
So it didn't turn out to be quite such a big deal, but yes, that was the another reason not to change it. Was yeah, I think women I mean, this is a massive generalization, but speaking for myself, it seems to me that women tend to grow up a bit quicker, a bit faster than men, because they've got more to worry about, in terms of the power imbalance and in terms of biology and for all kinds of reasons. Um, I think a lot of marriages are a study in the woman waiting for the boy to grow up, or indeed shaping that male side of the partnership. That's going to irritate the hell out of certain people listening, but that is sort of what I think, and therefore that's what I put in the book.
It's all about nuance. There can be lots of opinions on a subject, and and that is what Alexandra's question is about. She's, and the second part of her question is, so this is not something that men sit around discussing. How to guide.
No,
Yeah, which
it's,
is
it's absolutely it's absolutely not what we sit around discussing. No, I mean, if the book was full of what men sit around discussing, I'd be Nick Hornby, and it would sell much better. No, I don't. I don't know what the book would be like if I. It would be a very different kind of book.
Yeah, well, I mean, which is sort of really interesting information playing into your decision to write Kate as Kate. Um, we've got our neuroscientist, Catherine Loveday, here, and she says, in relation to Alexandra's question, which was the last question, my son Joe wonders whether this reflects a change in the attitudes surrounding masculinity that were quite prevalent in your memoir, How Not to Be a Boy.
Sorry, what was the question? What about the masculinity? What about it?
She wonders whether I think she wonders whether there's been a kind of like change in the attitudes around masculinity that was so prevalent in How Not to Be a Boy, which is obviously when you grew up in.
Boy. There was a change, sort of in between me writing How Not to Be a Boy and it being published. I mean, it was most of that book was written in the summer of 2016, and by the time it was published towards the end of 2017, Me Too had happened, and Me Too actually came just a little bit after. But I mean, things have been changing quite rapidly over the last few years, it seems, and it was around that time. The Windsors, you had Harry and William talking about, men should talk about their feelings and talk about their grief and their mother and mental health. And that was, I'm not saying that was a big moment but it was just one of those things that actually that wouldn't have happened even 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And so it felt like things were moving on. I think that book, which I'm very proud of, which tells I think I had a good story to tell. But in terms of its politics, I think it's very much of its. It was part of that conversation. I think it was joining a conversation rather than starting it. But I'm glad it was there, because I'm glad it's still there.
Yeah, it's a brilliant book, and I think it doesn't have a car chase in it, but can't have everything.
I have never personally been in a car chase, so I was scrupulous about not inventing car chases.
But I think what's lovely in your answer to Catherine is she's asking really on behalf of her son, young boy, and it just sounds like the attitudes have really changed since you have changed and are changing since you wrote that book. And
well, I mean, I hope so. I mean, it's a difficult thing to measure, isn't it? And there were probably certain playgrounds in certain parts of the country where, for example, homophobic bullying is alive and well. I mean, what do I know? I mean, there are teachers in the family, and I think it's a mixed picture. But it would be nice to think that I think it's certainly true that generationally, there are young people who can't believe that homosexuality used to be illegal, for example. And on the one hand, you want to go, guys, you need to know about this. Because we owe them that much. But on the other hand, it's great that you can't imagine that you're like the girl from the future. You come from the future. You can't imagine that people were treated in this weird way, and that's partly what's going on in Come Again. And it's that's encouraging.
And I hope that answers Liz Sloane's question as well, which was a question about the feedback on how not to be a boy and how it has benefited people based on your writing the book. So thank you for that question, Liz. We've got another question from Jill and Justin, who I know for a fact met Freshers Week at the University of York.
Wow.
Yes. How about that? And they wanted to know if you drew on your own university experience, which is a lovely question.
Yes, yes, of course I did. I mean, it's I didn't want to do Cambridge again because I'd done Cambridge and Cambridge has been written about for forever. So I was looking for another university. The people I've met at York are all just lovely. I mean, I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass. I mean, every single person who's been to York, they are just really straightforwardly nice people. And not nice in a bland way, but they're just good guys. And so I just have a fond, I get a fond kind of vibe from it. And I literally did some research, like some kind of proper novelist. And I went I went down for a weekend, for a weekend, and went and wandered around the campus. But there are dissimilarities, obviously, because it's a campus university, which is what I wanted. I wanted there to be a central place where there's a lake and then and you have the bar and various bars and stuff, unlike a collegiate, old posh ridiculous university where it's all sort of diffuse. It's all disseminated. It's all split up.
We know, yeah.
So there are lots of different colleges and but it was not. I wanted a place that was all kind of centralized like that, just because it's a pain getting a character from one end of a town to another. So my own experiences, yes, I was really old when I turned up at university because I was old for my year. It was with a September birthday, and I'd had this enforced year out because I had to seriously redo my A-levels. I literally went back to school for a year. So I was 20 by the time I turned up, and I think possibly the idea that feeling of being older kind of feeds into the story as well. That might be why I was interested in that the situation where Kate is surrounded by people much younger. In her case, much younger. But it's the same feeling that I have. Literally have a recurring dream about being back at college, being middle-aged, and wondering why I'm doing this again. And I think that's almost certainly fed into why I'm writing this story as well. Because I have this thing about, I'm surrounded by children and I shouldn't be here. I'm behind. I should have done this 2 years ago. This is a common feeling. So for me, so I immediately made friends with a bunch of third years, and who were roughly my age. And there was a clique. There were like 3 boys and 3 girls, 3 men and 3 women, I should say. And they lived in one of the college houses, Robinson College, where I went, and they were a really interesting group of people, and they're all quite eccentric people, and so I think I've replicated some of that in Kez and Toby and Amy, and I want it, and Kate, of course, and they are this gang, and I love gangs. I love writing about gangs, thinking about gangs, and being in gangs. I'm not sure if I am in a gang, apart from my family, I suppose. But yeah, no, I wanted a sort of clique of slightly querulous, argumentative group of friends. Of course, when the trouble with the structure of the book is we never really see them when they bond. We're only with them in the first few days that they've met each other, well, the first one day that they've met each other. But you can see that they're going to be a really tight gang, and you can see where it comes from. So that was the main thing that I took.
It's absolutely one of my most brilliant passages. My favourite passages in the book is when you say, in that freshest moment, you don't know whether that person you speak to, you're going to be with them through to their kind of like funeral, be an aunt to their children, or you'll never see them again. It's just such an extraordinary time in your life, and you really capture that so well for anyone who's been through it. And like you say, a year at that time is like 9 years, and it's like a dog year if you're 2 years older than the people you were. You get that so well.
Exactly.
We're coming to the end now of Book Club Live, but there were a couple of questions I just wanted to ask because they're about books, and I think We should. And
Mm.
one of them was the fact that, you've written this kind of adventure story, this spy caper, this time traveling grief novel, um, the genre as it is. And yet you also managed to find a starring role for the bookshop,
Yes. Yeah.
which is just gorgeous. Are you a bookshop fan, Robert? Please say yes.
Yes, of course I am. Yeah, and that bookshop is based on my local bookshop, and the bookshop owner is the local bookshop owner. And there was this she's the character Danielle is older and different in several ways. But the real life bookshop owner, she's on Twitter, and it was years ago, and she just said something about, it was just some comment about no, we don't sell audiobooks because audiobooks are the sperm of the devil. And I just took that and ran with it, and out of that you get this character that the real life person isn't really like that and doesn't go around saying things like that. But she has a slightly waspish Twitter persona. But I took that and made her like that to the customers, and so you got a slightly sort of black books kind of attitude to her customers. She really shouldn't be running a bookshop, but she loves books. The fictional version. Yes, no, absolutely, completely, 100%, just stolen from real life.
Oh no, it's brilliant. And there are so many touches in the books that if the book lovers are just totally delightful. I love the fact that Kate's dad is reading The End of History. I love the fact that Kate picks up a book in that bookshop, which is 100 Best Things You've Forgotten About the 90s. And I love the fact that you've even write a bit of Luke's novel. Can you tell us about Luke's novel?
That was a lot of fun. Well, Luke is a completely talentless writer. I mean, bless him. And he's fascinated by language, but just doesn't want to tell a story. Thinks it's beneath him to tell a story. That passage is, it's what a bad writer who is heavily influenced by Martin Amis might think a paragraph of really sensationally interesting and cliche-free writing might look like. It's not my parody of Martin Amis. It's my parody of somebody accidentally writing a pastiche of Martin Amis.
And it must have been so lovely when you were writing the book to be able to write about a tortured writer.
Yes. No, I mean, I gather that's another cliche that I've ticked off the list, writing about writers. But hey ho.
Oh no, it's just a gorgeous device. It was just fantastic, and it's really really funny. And I also thought it just must be fun to change the point of view, that you're actually writing from Kate's position about living with a writer, which is a totally different perspective. And I love that, the kind of living with someone who's been writing a book for 28 years.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I mean, I was kind of stretching a point there, but that's part of Luke's illness. His kind of obsessiveness is partly explained by what's going on literally in his brain.
It's so brilliant. It's such a joined up book. Thank you so much for writing it, Robert, and thank you so much for allowing us into your study for an hour. And I'm so sorry, Cynthia, that I can't ask Robert about his decoration and who has done the but maybe we'll do it another time. I just wanted to say thank you so much, Robert, for your time and for writing such a brilliant book, and congratulations on publication. I'm sure it's not quite what you were expecting to do around publication, but you delighted us so much on this really windy, wet lockdown Sunday, so thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, everyone, for reading the book and for listening to me gabbling on. Thank you very much.
It's been brilliant. Thank you so much for coming along to Book Club Live. If you haven't read Robert's book yet, or you want to buy a copy for a friend, or if you want to get a copy from us, then the book is available on our website. Please buy from us and not from them. You know who them are. Not that I want to slag them off in public because I'm scared of them, but do buy from us. We'd be so grateful. We really hope you join us again at another Book Club Live. We're actually running the Also Festival digitally next weekend, across the whole weekend for 3 days. We're going to be having a huge number of book talks and also wild swimming and learn to cook paella and all kinds of workshops. It's going to be crazy and lots of fun. Come and join us. Thank you so much. This book club is now closed.